It's my great pleasure to introduce Harriet Sugarman. Harriet is Executive Director of Climate Mama, Professor of Climate Change and Society and World Sustainability, and Chair of the Climate Reality Project, New York City Metro Chapter. She is a nationally recognized influencer, connector, and trusted messenger for parents on solutions to our climate crisis. A recipient of the prestigious Climate Reality Green Ring Award and praised by Al Gore as an outstanding climate reality leader who has demonstrated an exceptional commitment to her role as a climate communicator and activist. Thank you so much for joining us, Harriet. I'm going to turn it over to you, and really excited.
Well, thanks so much, Winona. And I'm really thrilled to be with all of you. I am talking to you from New York City, where it was a brisk day here, not 65 degrees. But I'm originally from Alberta, so not so far from where you are. And Catherine Heo also is Canadian, so you're bringing the Canadians in, or Canadians and Americans. So it's truly my pleasure to be here, and over the last little while to get to know more about what all of you are doing with your organization and just broadly in Montana. It's been really wonderful to see. So what Winona and I talked about, I'm actually going to share a few slides with you, because I thought maybe instead of just my talking head, you'll see a few other pictures, and then talk a little bit about the book, where the ideas behind it came from. And then, we're a nice sized group in terms of just being able to open it up, and I'm happy to answer your questions, go down any road that you want to go down with this. As Winona said, I am the Executive Director of Climate Mama, which is an organization that I founded now almost 12 years ago. So we were one of the very first parent organizations in the parent space, just out there to be a resource for parents to learn more about the climate crisis and to be able to talk about it with our kids. And now there are many more. I'm actually thrilled to be part of a new organization called Our Kids Climate, or we relaunched it, which I know, Winona, you're also involved with, where we're working to not recreate the wheel, but to help parent organizations around the world actually in talking to our kids, to being wherever we're needed. And I think that's the thing when we talk with our children, and whatever age they are, whether they're very young kids or they're, married with kids of their own, that we talk to them from where they're at. And we may know more than them, we may know less than them, but we're there where we're needed, whether it's in front, behind, beside. And so I want to talk a little bit about that as well with you. But let me grab my slide deck and just sort of use that to talk to you from. So here we are. So that's my book. I wanted to start with this picture. And these are my kids, and Elliot and Alana. And in 2018, I think that was a year that many young people were motivated and alarmed about what was happening in the climate crisis, because that was the year that the IPCC report, the International Panel on Climate Change, came out and said we have till 2030 before we reach these irreversible or very complicated tipping points in our planet. And I as Winona said, I'm a professor. I meet with lots of parents, lots of kids, and I think there's this feeling that somehow in 2030, which now is only 9 years away, that somehow the world ends, or a lot of our kids feel that way. And we all see, and I'm sure you feel, all of the changes in Montana, be it fires or 65 degrees at the beginning of March or whatever it is. We know things are changing, but in 2030, especially for many of us in the United States, things will change, but the world isn't ending. And so this alarmist kind of a sort of echo that we hear from a lot of young people. I think also understanding where we're at is an important part of explaining that, and I try to do that in the book. But in the meantime, it goes really fast. And for those of you that have young kids, like I can't believe my children are young adults, and so that time goes by. And in this same way that it goes by quickly, also taking now more than that 10,000 foot view, um, it also, our lives are but a blip in the eye of the planet, right? And so we're here and we're gone. But the changes that we're creating on our planet, um, from what scientists tell us, have never happened at the speed and with the intensity that they've happened before. So this actually is a photograph that was taken on Christmas Eve, 1968. And it was taken, it has a name, it's called Earthrise. It was taken by the first Apollo mission to leave the near Earth orbit, and they circled back. As they were circling over, this is the surface of the moon, we saw our planet. And in some ways similar to some moments this past year with COVID, where we were all focused on one thing globally, because we're never focused, right? Lives are so frenetic and busy, but this was a different year, a year out of that. And I think there are many lessons that we can learn from this last year moving forward for how we address the climate crisis and how we speak about it. But in terms of this picture, it was incredibly impactful. It was the first time we saw ourselves. People saw the fragility of our planet, recognized that. And we had the first Earth Day, we had the first Clean Water Act, we set up the Environmental Protection Agency with a Republican president. And politics weren't, the partisanship that we're seeing, unfortunately, divide us on the greatest challenge we'll face in our lifetimes, this challenge of the climate crisis. And again, something we'll be living with for the rest of our lives as well, has to be something that we all are part of. And so that's part of our discussions with our kids as well too. But we do have, this administration now that seems to recognize the crisis that we're at, and that's a good thing. But it also, things take time, and even though time moves quickly. So part of our motto with Climate Mama, the organization, and something that guided me as I wrote the book was, these really simple truths that I think no matter, maybe your parents taught you, you probably teach talk to your children about, or think about them as you're talking to your children. But really, we need to tell the truth about the climate crisis, however complicated that is. And it will be, more involved with some kids, and depending on the age of our children will change. But when they ask us about it, or when they want to know things about it, we have to leave. We can't pretend everything's okay. But in that same truth is that there are so many people working on it, so many people to help move forward, and there's so many opportunities, because we're alive at this truly incredible time in the history of the human species, where we can impact our species and all others, and depending on what we do now. And so that truth to share with our children can be really, instead of being scary and being, feeling like the world is going to end in a short period of time, which again, I think that there is this belief with a lot of our young people, it can actually help guide us that everything that we do, and I talk about this in the book as well, is through a lens of our climate emergency. So whether they want to be an artist, or a plumber, or a pipe fitter, or a teacher, or a scientist, if we look at that through the lens of the climate crisis, it presents all kinds of opportunities. So our motto, tell the truth, actions speak louder than words, and don't be afraid. And so in terms of telling the truth, well, we need to trust in the science, and the science is overwhelming in that, the real simple things are, we're living a climate crisis. We have been responsible for creating it. It is really bad. It's getting worse, but there are things we can do about it. And holding on to that last part, that scientists are telling us that we still have time, that, this door is spring loaded and it's shutting behind us. And we are passing through barriers with our planet that will take, many lifetimes to come back from, but we can slow down our climate emergency. And that's the important part to remind ourselves and to tell our children that science is still telling us. So instead of going over to the other extreme that I talk about in the book, there's a very small group, I think, that are loud voices of deniers. But now coming up on the other side is the doomers, the people that say, well, it's all over. We have no choice. We have no choice. There's no opportunities. Well, I personally, and from what I see, from what science is telling us, that we are not doomed. We have an opportunity to slow down the changes we put in place. And where, again, I truly believe this, and I've worked on this for many, many years as an economist before, and get to meet with scientists that really know their stuff, that we can create a future where our children will be able to thrive, not just manage through chaos, which is what will happen if we don't do anything. So again, trust in the science. We need to be honest and age appropriate. And then I think it's important too, and I'm happy to talk to you more about this also if you want, is the power of each of us as individuals, but the impact of the collective. I think we in the climate movement put a lot of blame and shame on each other. Are we doing enough? Are you, what are you eating? What are you driving? What are you, are you flying? And we need systemic change. We have gone too far down that road of destruction, or of what we've done with the climate crisis. But so we need huge changes. We need systemic changes. But for many people, if we don't realize our own footprint and what we do, then maybe it doesn't make us realize where things are at or move to action. So I think that through our individual actions, we can create and move towards that systemic change. And those of us that can just put one foot in front of the other, and sometimes we feel like we can't do that, that's okay. But those of us that can take giant leaps or encourage people, those companies, those organizations, those elected officials to do those bigger things, they have to do that. And we have to be part of that. So that difference between collective versus personal, I think there's room for both, but I think also recognizing that we need those big changes as well. Actions speak louder than words. Well, I think, and from what I see with your organizations, I mean, you're doing that, right? You are walking the walk, but there are still people, elected officials, companies that talk the talk, right? We're sustainable, we're green, we're, we get this, we get it, we need a just transition. Well, what does that mean? And, how does that actually move from words to policy to action? So coming to terms with that and helping our kids understand that as well is really important. But the first thing before you can do all those things is you have to also remember to take care of yourself, and then your community. And so, and I know that you've done some workshops on this, on the importance of understanding that once you know what we face, it's terribly sad, right? We're in we put in place a time in the history of our planet where we are more powerful than volcanoes. We're more powerful than forces that have changed our planet in the past. And we have put in place the extinction of many species. We don't even know, scientists tell us that, but many of our children don't even know what was nature like where we live. And so spending time outdoors with them, reminding them what's here and what's disappearing, the flora, the fauna, the changes in climate, those are important too. And recognizing that we are sad as parents as those things change is, something we can share with them and talk about with them. But then what we're doing to make sure it slows, those changes slow down. And so you're a trusted messenger with your child. And I know it varies at different ages. At certain points, I think when my kids were teenagers, maybe I wasn't their first go-to for their trusted messenger, but I know they've come back around. So that's pretty good too. And if you have middle schoolers, they do, I think, circle back there. But in that same way that we're trusted messengers, our children can be our trusted messengers. So I talk about this in the book, but I put this quote here because this is from the Secretary General of OPEC. And this was in 2019. And if the leaders of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting States are hearing from their children that their kids, want to know what they're doing about the climate crisis. What if they can hear that? That's important, and that's an important reminder that our elected officials, their children, they're starting to listen to their children, I think, too, in a way that wasn't being done before. And I think somehow some part of that has been raised up by what's happened with the youth movement around the world since 2018, since not just Greta Thunberg, but she sort of got a lot of visibility, but there are thousands of Gretas around our country and around the world that were inspired, again, whether, through a variety of reasons, to speak out and be heard. And they are being heard in a way that they weren't before. I've worked in this space, as I said, for many, many years, and with both feet in it. Since 2007, when I did one of the first trainings with the Climate Reality Project in Al Gore, and then founded Climate Mom in 2009. And I've met many amazing young people that with very loud voices, feeling what's happening, who have really made their mark. But the way the movement has grown and the youth movement has grown, I think that we as parents now are being asked to respond to that in a way that, in a much larger way than we were before. And so that's a good thing, right? So our kids are asking us, and then we have to respond, and youth are bringing the intersectionality of the climate crisis. We kind of siloed it in the past, I think, in many ways, but they're connecting the dots for us. And that's important too, and we can talk more about that. So, there was our motto: tell the truth, actions speak louder than words, and don't be afraid. I think this is the hardest one, because when you really accept and understand everything that's happening, it's really, it's hard not to be afraid. But again, and I talk about this in the book, and we can talk about it more, that we need to see that future. We need to see our children thriving. We need to see where we want them, where we imagine they are, and ourselves as well, and then not be afraid to figure out the steps along the way for us to get there. And so I put these 3 things here. I mean, there are many things to do and many ways to talk to our children, as there are people on the planet, and every child is different, and we come at it in different ways. But I sort of get asked, I'm a busy parent, tell me 3 things that I can do. And so I ended up, while I talk about many things, I did put these 3 things in, because I think you can take them in many different directions, right? But we've seen in the last while in our country that our democracy is fragile, and we need to protect it in many ways. And so we need to be involved in our government systems. We need to follow up with our elected officials. And if they've made promises to us, we need to understand how they're going to fulfill those. And we can help educate them about the realities of the climate crisis if they aren't educated, and what that means in many different parts of it. Or we can be one of those elected officials if we can. And our children watching us do that. They can come with us. They can write letters. They can send cards. They can, visit with us to the State House. I've taken so many people on visits to the New Jersey and New York State House who'd never been there before, or to our city halls. And those are our houses, right? Those are our houses, and they're for us to go visit. And yes, maybe it's getting more complicated with all of the, the reality of the day here, but those are still places we should feel comfortable walking in and visiting, and talking to our elected officials. So, and then we, as I said, we need to follow up and be prepared, and we need to plant ideas, and then both figuratively, and then watch them grow, and then we getting down and dirty, planting a garden, going into the forest, being actually in the dirt, planning with our children, with ourselves, is just in a way, I think there's nothing like that as well too. So I think that's an important thing as well. And I think I'm going to stop there because I've talked a lot. And as I told Winona, my classes that I teach now are 3-hour blocks, and so I can go on for a really long time. Yeah, but yeah, I'd love to have a conversation and talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Harriet, I'd love to thank you very much for those slides, and we were going to have time for lots of discussion and questions. So I kind of wanted to kick things off with kind of a core question that I hear. I hear from different parents of different age kids, like, how do I approach it with this age? And I was wondering if you could just speak to briefly kind of the core differences. I mean, there's some intuitive differences, but I think especially between like elementary and middle school kids, and then also just sort of what, how to engage with high schoolers as well.
Sure, yeah, and I do go there in the book as well. And in fact, I reached out to many of my colleagues and friends that also work in the climate space that have kids of all different ages, and was honored and excited to be able to share some of their advice and some of their words as well in the book. But yes, and again, I think that you probably have a special group here, I imagine, right? That many of you are active and involved and working in different ways on educating people. So your kids probably pick up much more than you realize, even very young ones, by watching you and being with you and coming with you. So you may get questions too at an age from them when you might not necessarily expect they would ask you that. I actually, in terms of our very youngest kids, our children that are preschool or younger, a friend of mine that I wrote to, and I mean that was part of the book as well, who works on climate communication, said that her 4-year-old came to her and asked her, what she thought about climate change, and in the way that her 4-year-old looked at her, waiting for this response, she and it's something she lives. This is her job. She said she just burst into tears because it was coming. It just opened up a well of all of these things. We just talked about, that the sadness, the grief, the, oh my gosh, are we going to do there? And you're 4 years old, and you shouldn't have to be even thinking about this. But many of our kids, especially yours, perhaps, they're growing up with this. It's just part of their lives in a different way than it was part of many of our lives, because it really, well, I started working on the climate crisis back in 1992 when I joined the International Monetary Fund's office at the UN, and we were working on the first Earth Summit documents, the Rio conference, and it was like, it's over there. It was this thing that was happening, even though it was an emergency then, and life would have been way different had we actually addressed it that way then. But it still seemed really far away, and I think we weren't teaching climate in our schools, many of our schools. And I don't know, that's something I'd love to talk to you about as well. Is that being taught in your school districts? And where is it? Is it only being taught in science? Because it can get, that's a place too to show our children that we care and we're bringing it in. And especially maybe in that middle school time where they don't want to hear from us, but to know that you're um, working on this in certain ways can be helpful. But anyways, I've diverted from the question, but I'm going to go back to it, Winona. But so to the point that even while you might think I can't talk to a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old about the climate crisis, and maybe you won't talk about it as a crisis, right? You don't want to, we shouldn't have to talk with our kids, that's too young. Um, but we can talk about changes that we see on hikes that we go on with them, or when we're out in nature, and our children often have this innate sense of love for nature and things. When we see uh, animals in nature, we can tell them how we've seen you know the birds come earlier or later. Or I imagine in Montana, certainly I know in Alberta and British Columbia, when I go back to visit my family, the bark beetle damage is incredible. And so explaining that also has to do with this little tiny beetle that used to stay asleep in the wintertime, and now it's waking up because it's not as cold as it used to be. So even using science in ways things that young people, our youngest kids, can really understand those things. And so without being scary, but that's part of telling the story of actually what's happening and the changes that we see around us. And in elementary school, talking about do you have a water bottle in your car, and what's it made of? It's made of plastic. Where does plastic come from? It comes from oil. And then just sort of tell this story of things. Kids are really interested where things come from, and so help shape and share that story. Or the story of electricity, and how, or do you have a gas stove or electric stove, and why does that matter or important? And so just bringing in things in your everyday life. And then, as I said before, both at that young age, elementary school or younger, if you're involved and going, well, when again we can go to rallies and visit state houses, and hopefully that'll be sooner than later, they can come with you, or they can draw a card, or make be part of what you're doing, and you can help them understand that you're doing it to take care of people in your community. And I think, again, learning from what's happened over this last year, where communities came together, and early in the pandemic, where people maybe sewed masks or brought food to first responders. And there's similarities that we'll have address later on, but just how we can come together as a community to help. And then how does that transfer to the things we're doing on for our work on climate. And then when they're in middle school, or even still in elementary school, do you have family meetings? Do you talk about a plan that you can do? And again, this goes to that personal versus the community. What are you doing in your own house to try to make things, to use less energy, to maybe have a meatless Monday? And why would you do that? Even what does that matter? Or buying sustainable foods, or going to your local farmers market, or why is that important? And so bringing them along and asking their opinions, even when they're young, but especially when they're young and in middle school, let them shape that conversation, that plan, what your family's going to do, because they have a lot to say, and we should listen. And so let's include that in some of the plans that you may develop as a family. And then what about with your neighbors, or your other relatives, and are again sharing some of these good things that you're doing. And oftentimes you will be surprised by some of the ideas that they have. And then as they get, and some of our you may be very involved, or not, working on some of these things. And again, I think most of you here are, and that's why you're here. But they may not want to be, and they shouldn't have to if they don't want to, but they should be allowed to hear from you why you're doing the work that you're doing, and why it's important to you. So I think, explaining that, and then especially, in sort of that middle school time where it could be that they really don't want to be seen doing what you're doing, because sometimes at that age we embarrass our kids, or again, it feels like that for them. So, but they're watching, right? They're seeing what you're doing. And so I think that's okay too. And then just being there when they have those questions and comments. And, again, in that period and in high school, what are they learning? Again, it's really varied, state by state, district by district. Um, if you can and have the wherewithal to be able to find out or talk to people on the school board or find out what they're learning, and being taught, that's important as well. And they can see and watch you do that as well. So there's definitely, different ways to, um, just bring in the conversation about climate, um, that doesn't have to be in their face direct, like, oh my gosh, this is happening. I don't know about all of you. I especially for me in the work that I was doing, I would sort of feel like I could just let my hair down when I was home with my family. And sometimes it would be that part that was, oh my gosh, I just saw, this ice sheet broke off, or this happened. I would bring all the bad news home. And because that was where I felt I could just let it out. Well, there's so many exciting things that are happening on the positive side. So sharing those, again, age appropriate, but, um, you live in this incredible part of the country where wind energy is really, um, so successful, and sharing, whether it's something big like that, or I have my cousin and her son's working on electric boats, and he's really into, and my cousin's youngest, that's so cool to them to see this. And why would you have, that it doesn't go on gas anymore, or whatever. So bringing in happy, positive stories from your own area, things that can be place-based, are really, wonderful as well, and that in terms of our education too, what's happening in and around us. Um, but just sharing, positive messages and stories, because there are so many. Um, and I think sometimes we get stuck on, uh, the negative ones, or the ones that seem that are hard to do something about, but are shocking to us in that way. And maybe, just remembering we don't have to share all of that, and that there are ways to share the positives too. So maybe more of an answer than you were looking for, Winona. Sorry.
Oh, that's great. No, this is great. It's just going to be, it's just really appreciate this conversation as a resource. And I have a follow-up question. I just want to mention for everyone listening, I do want to share the link to Harriet's book. If you're interested, there's the link where you can find information about how to get her book. One of the things we visited about before this event was this tension between the working on personal change and systemic change, and systems change. And, that quote, there's a quote in your book where you talk about how, 90 to 100 companies are responsible for most of the emissions on the planet. And here I am, and, many moms and dads feel harried, especially now, and exhausted. And, I find myself, sometimes just feeling really angry at the victim blaming of the, personal carbon footprint. Although it's super important, and I feel committed to my own like changing my own behavior and being aware. Could you just talk about that tension a little bit more, and kind of how we shift from kind of personal focus to more systems change focus?
Sure. Yeah, and I do, in the book I use this example of the Keep America Beautiful campaign, which actually, which is how we started our recycling projects and programs in our country, and which is a good thing. But it actually came, to being from, many of the first board members, of the Keep America Beautiful campaign were bottling companies, and packaging companies, and it happened, at a time when all of a sudden plastics, and plastic bottling was coming to the forefront. And many of these companies, that was an expensive thing if they were going to have to take them back and figure out a way to reuse them or recycle them. So let's just pass it on to the consumer. Let's convince the consumer that they should keep America beautiful by recycling all of these things. And we know that, again, many of us probably recycle. Most people sadly don't. But so that idea of big corporations putting the onus on us, that it's our job, um, to do all these things. Part of some of those carbon footprint calculators, some of those things also are coming from sources you would not even, imagine, that keeping that pressure on us, that it's our job, to turn the lights out every time we leave the room, to, be conscious of how many flights we take, to get a low emissions car. And, yeah, let's do those things or be conscious of it. But you can work your whole, and, if you live where I live, in the part of Manhattan I live in, I can do that easier, because around me are those places. In many places, not possible. And we shouldn't be made to feel guilty that we can't be so, pure in every respect as it comes to our own carbon footprint, because, everybody, isn't going to do that. Not everybody, when I first started doing the climate reality talks, and we talk about changing your light bulb or changing your vote, but we need the corporations to create those. It can be huge, right? The impact that a big company can make in terms of demanding from its suppliers to do X, Y, and Z, and that is huge. Well, you can spend every waking moment thinking how you can be more sustainable in your house, from the paint you use to all these things. We're in an emergency, and we need big solutions right away. Just like now we're in a pandemic and we need to get everybody vaccinated, and we need, to do what we're doing to get through it. There are individual things that we can all do, but the big things now, we're too far down the road with the climate crisis. So I think we have to let some of that guilt go that we hold on our shoulders. And we can do the best we can, but it isn't on your, you shouldn't feel guilty if you're, from my perspective anyways, and how I talk about this and do it. My mom lives in Edmonton, Alberta, and I live on the East Coast, and I haven't seen her in a year and a half, or over a year now, because of COVID. But, as soon as I can, I'm flying there. And, I feel no guilt whatsoever. And I go every summer to Alberta. And I when I'm in Alberta, I hear a lot, "Oh, how'd you get here?" Like these, "Oh, I flew." Well, you flew, how can you be a climate activist if you flew on an airplane? It, you know, I'm working every day to talk about all these things. I work on lots of campaigns, and I don't have to also make excuses, because I want the airline to be able to fly, using fuels that are not fossil fuels and aren't biofuels. To invent a way to do it, and we need to demand those big systemic changes, those big changes across the board, so that we don't have to just tie ourselves in knots changing our lives, because we know everybody can't do that, because they can't afford to do it, because they don't live in a community where it's accessible, or they just don't want to do it. So we need those changes to happen. So I'm a very strong, I feel very strongly about that, Winona, that, and we sometimes in the climate movement, I think, are harder on each other than others. And I think we need to let go of that. It doesn't mean that we have to create a huge footprint. And I think understanding, I have my students do their carbon footprint so they can actually understand that using energy, does things. What you buy matters. But we need systemic changes really quickly. And, so anyways, you get the idea. I get.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I want to ask one more question, and I'm going to open it up. So if those of you who are listening patiently, if you have questions, please type them in the chat, or in a moment after this next question, you will get a chance to unmute and just go ahead and ask your question. That's fine too. So, the longer I'm involved as a organizer and an activist, I just realize how much there is to do, and that there are opportunities for leadership in so many ways. Not everybody's comfortable stepping into a public role, and a lot of people don't have the bandwidth. They could be in Missoula. Many families, have between the two parents have 4 jobs, to be able to afford housing and make, you know, uh, take care of their bills and their children. So, but there's such a need for more leaders. And I'm just wondering if you could speak for a moment on the importance, the impact on our kids in our community, whether they're our kids or kids, if we don't have our own children, or our children are grown and, maybe we're a teacher, just the impact on our community's children of seeing adults in their lives step up, and just the importance of that intergenerational kind of work.
Yeah, I think it's so important that we, I think there are many young people, especially the ones that have been activated recently, that feel such a heavy weight on their shoulders. And I think there are many adults that put that back on our kids that say, oh, well, now the kids are awake, or they're going to do something about it, or it's up to them. And it can't be. It has to be all of us, because it's going to take many of us. And whether our children are too young to vote, we can still vote. We need to demand those leaders that are in power, whether it's us or others, and our kids are seeing us, step into those roles. But I just, for a moment, I was on a call yesterday, I think, with this young leader in the climate movement, and we were doing these round of introductions because the other person we were on hadn't met her before, and she was, well, I graduated from high school in 2018, and then she went on from there. And I was like, and we were asking her advice, and she's been part of this movement building, this intersectional movement building, and it was, and it took me back for a minute when she said that, because I was like, and she's amazing. But you're right, not certainly she's very unique in that way, or there are some young people like that, but not everybody's like that. And so you're right, everyone has their role in their different place, and we can figure that out. And whether we as an adult are there to hold the line behind, well, our high school students are very active, and then we make sure that they get breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or something, to go, and we're there to support them. I actually find that middle and high school students, in many ways, can be more involved as activists than a lot of the college students that I meet and interact with, because they're out on their own. And so, we can be that support for our younger kids that want to be involved, but not every kid wants to be that. But I think, again, to see that spectrum of that we're all shouldering it, and at some moments we'll be in front, leading those marches, setting up the table, doing whatever it is. At sometimes we'll be just behind, and we just creating space for our children's voices to be heard. And that's where we can be the most impactful. And sometimes we'll be, marching right beside them, holding their hand. So, but to either, we need to step back and recognize that we have a lot to learn from young people as well. But there will be moments we'll be asked to do things too. And again, whether you might not be able to do it, but maybe your neighbor can. But so to show your child that there are other people doing it, I think is really important. As important as it is to show our children other children that are doing things. So that self-efficacy, that they know they can see themselves in that role. So, I work with this organization called Young Voices for the Planet, and we have a series of videos of young people from around the country taking action, whether it was saving energy in their schools. It was this young boy from Germany that said he was going to plant 1 billion trees, and he set up an they did that actually. Or a young girl in Connecticut who got a coal plant stopped, starting when she was 10 years old. So that self-efficacy that comes with, wow, I don't have to wait till I'm a grown-up, or I can vote, or I'm well into my job. I can do things with the support of my parents in most cases, right, to be able to do that.
Thank you. Sorry, I was far away from the mute button. I would just like to open it up. And is there anyone who would like to ask a question? I would say turn on your video, unmute. I'll keep an eye out for you. Anybody? Okay. All right. I certainly have more questions that I can ask. Oh, Alicia, I was watching your little thumbnail thinking, oh, Alicia might jump in, and Amy as well. Okay, so Alicia, I see you. Why don't you go ahead and unmute?
Yeah, so I have a question. So I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I think you spoke to this a little bit, but I'd love to hear any other advice you have. Hey, no, thanks, Tucker. Hey, sorry, my dog's attacking things. I think that, I have a younger daughter who sort of just wants to get in the fight, and she's game. But my older daughter, I can see her kind of already wanting to shut down around all this. And I just feel like it's really fine line as a parent to definitely, you don't want to force anything on them, but this kind of avoidance and shutdown is really hard to see. And yet I completely understand it. I think it makes complete sense. Do you have any gentle, kind, alternative ways that you can engage kids around these issues without having that, as they get older and really understand the severity without feeling like it's too much? I don't know if that question was very well worded, but.
No, I totally get what you're saying, Alicia, and it's complicated, right? Because it's not fair. Our children can't be kids anymore, right? Because they're growing up in this really, I guess probably people say at every age things are very complicated, but I think that, for many of us that have come of age in the US in the last 10, 20, 30 years, right? It seems like things have been, there are so many opportunities. And now I think all of a sudden our children and us are feeling like, are all these bad things going to happen? And kids should be able to be kids, right? Your kids should be able to go out and ride a bike and do whatever it is that they want to do, and not have to think about these things. And so, and especially, I guess, at 11 or 7, or, maybe they're there because they see you doing it. But, are there other ways to engage your daughter? Is it your daughter? Or, yeah. Occasionally, or to bring her in. I guess it's one thing, like, is it something that if you're concerned about her being depressed about it or worried about it and she's not talking about it, but if it's just she just wants to watch X, Y, and Z or do whatever and just not think about all of this, then maybe she does that. I think personally I would say that's okay. And can when you have a family meeting, or a moment when you are all deciding to do something, what's her opinion, or bringing her in smaller ways on things can be just her contribution. And you can let her help you make choices about what you're cooking or what you're doing, and you can explain why you're doing something in one way or another way. But I think, again, it's hard enough for us. We burn out a lot. I've seen so many colleagues and friends just because they're in it with both feet all the time and don't take a moment to take some of that time off, or take care of themselves. And so for our kids, right? And it can be just overwhelming. And so maybe she just needs a time out from it. And I think just allowing that, and it doesn't mean you have to take a time out, or your 7-year-old has to take a time out if you don't want to. And, again, the same way that our individual actions, we understand where they come from. But if your 11-year-old isn't actively involved in it, it's not going to change that bigger picture, right? And maybe she needs a break and a timeout from it. But maybe there are ways, again, in terms of things that you're doing in the family, or you're deciding, are you going to, go visit this park or go do something else? And maybe there are things that they can, she can bring in. Why would we go here instead of there? Or, there are ways to bring it around to the work that you're doing, or the care that you have on these things, that she can hear and see and maybe contribute to without being as actively involved. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think that the challenging thing, I think sometimes, is that I can tell that she thinks about it and she cares about it, and it upsets her. But unlike my younger daughter, who's like, I'm going to go do something, she just shuts down. So it's not so much that I'm sitting there trying to like make her do anything, but I can,
of course,
her doesn't have the natural instinct of doing something that makes her feel better about it,
Well, maybe even showing her other young people, like, again, that's just one example, but these Young Voices for the Planet videos, or other young people that are doing things, again, that doesn't have to be that they're leading a march, or they're, like, maybe that's not her thing, but that are creating art. We're part of this campaign that's launching for Mother's and Father's Day to bring illustrators in. It's called Our Other Mother. And so, these amazing young people and established illustrators are doing drawings, and we're encouraging people to do plays, and maybe there are ways, what's she interested in? Is there a way through her passion and what it is? And again, I think that, and that's something I talk about in the book too, is like, where are kids passionate? What is, where is that? And is there a way that she can, help some of this angst come out in a positive way that way? And again, or seeing other young people that are doing other things. Can you do an energy audit of your house? Is she interested in numbers and things like that? Is there a way that she can help you guys save energy and money around the house? I had a friend, and he did this, he called it the green allowance. And if his kids could help them save money on their electric bill, then they got a percentage of the money that came back. And that was kind of like this extra allowance every week. So there's kind of fun things that you can create that just involve them in a really positive way, but just more indirect or something. So
I also, just to chime in, think about reading about solutions. I like to go to Project Drawdown on my hard days. Not that your 11-year-old wants to be on Project Drawdown, but and read about solutions, and just read, because they've documented so well how these solutions will, what impact they'll have. And the top 10 include educating women and girls. And it's a really, I don't know, I find their resources really powerful. It's just another piece. Alicia, did you want to do a follow-up?
Just a quick note here. I think it'll be easier, maybe Alicia and some others too, as it's just easier to get together. I think, I don't know, I look back, my daughter's now in college, and when she was young, a lot of times she did stuff, and sometimes because I asked her to do, because I'm a climate, activist, so I would be like, you guys need to make this poster, and she'd be like, oh. But one, she was seeing that I was caring about her future. And then once she got into it, they often got into it, especially if she could do it with friends. And so it just, if it's not working now, I don't know if you've felt that, Harriet, in this past year, but it's been hard, and it could get easier. But yeah, those are some really great suggestions. I appreciate them. I wonder if I could ask a question. I know there's a lot of folks that want you mentioned this, but want this curriculum to be climate curriculum to be taught in schools. And I wondered, have you ever like given teachers your book, like it's permissible to talk to your kids, or are there other resources that you'd really recommend? We're woefully undereducating our students, young people here in Missoula, I feel like, and in Montana. Do you have any suggestions around that?
Yeah, no, I actually have a lot, Amy, because I think it's an exciting time in that way, in this moment, and it's a bit of a Wild West in some ways too, because there are a number of states that are actually working to formalize the requirement to teach climate cross-curricular, and some that are, Washington State, not far from you. I mean, it has for a number of years now, they have $4 million in their budget annually, but it's for science specifically, but for teacher training. New Jersey, this past year, and this didn't come through the legislature in the same way it did in Washington. It came actually from the governor's wife, Tammy Murphy, who's actually a climate reality leader. We're passionate about it. And it was the every 5 years, the curriculum has to be revised. And so they are working with teachers and have with the Department of Ed, so that beginning this September, cross-curricular in 7 areas, K through 12, climate has to be taught, which is awesome, except, I mean, except, I mean, it's awesome, but there's no funding for teacher training in it or for curriculum. Well, so we're working in New York State. There are 3 bills in the legislature. Only one of them has funding. That one's to science. But, so, and some of the curriculum that we're using here is not place-based. It's not about what's happening here. So there's a lot of places that are developing curriculum, and there's a lot of lists out there of age-appropriate curriculum, like middle school curriculum. There's just awesome. Green Ninja, this professor from where's he at? I forget what California UC is at, but has developed this whole package of videos and curriculum, and it actually is to the it's really well done. So that's middle school curriculum. So there is a lot of different sources of curriculum that are out there. I've also done workshops with my book with teachers, actually, because on that aspect of educating ourselves, right? How can we ask teachers, especially at any time, but this past year, they're doing so much to help our children, whether it's online or most like, in person and online. And then we're going to put this other thing on their table and say, well, now you have to teach climate, well, how are they doing that if they're not trained or learned? So there's Climate Generation, which is out of Minnesota, and we have the Wild Center in New York that do teacher training around climate and offer professional development programs around it. So there's a place, I'll send it to Winona, and then I lurk on it, but the CLEAN network, the climate literacy. Anyway, the person who manages it is out of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, but there's people all over K through 12 and to high school level, college level, and they have good resources of things around climate and sustainability. So I find now the problem is finding good lists of that curriculum and good sources and trusted ones, right? And then place-based things as well. Maybe there isn't for Montana, but maybe there's in the region or something like that. So it's a longer conversation maybe, but it's an important one, Amy, I think, because it shouldn't fall on us as parents, but we can't put it on teachers' shoulders without training them and offering them curriculum. And actually, in Pennsylvania, I've worked in Pennsylvania, some of the curriculum they're getting is coming from gas companies. And it just skirts all around the climate issue, that climate was always changing, like incredible, and pressure for them to accept it in districts where they don't have funding for new resources. The Heartland Institute sent out thousands and thousands of copies of curriculum to teachers across the country a few years ago that said, climate has always been changing. And so it's complicated. And so that's why, again, not to put more work on us as parents, but just for people that they care about that is an important area. Working with our school boards and finding that curriculum and bringing it in. So there's a lot happening.
It makes me wonder whether this current administration's education department would be, maybe more able to or willing to offer some grants for that, because I think you're right that teacher training is so important. So that might be something that we, here in Missoula look for funding that, or Montana, sorry, that jumps from the feds to communities or school districts and bypasses our state government. I don't know.
I would, again, that's what, and we have no reason to doubt it, I don't think yet, because it's been the message that across every department, climate is going to be infused, right? And we're seeing it in transportation, we're seeing it even like in things like the FEC and energy and interior. It absolutely should be part of what comes from education, and building back better means preparing our youngest people to be able to withstand what's coming ahead. So I hope so.
Yeah, just a quick, I don't know if Megan and Laura are going to want to jump in at all, but Families for a Livable Climate, we've been working locally here in Missoula with the ad hoc group of a couple of students, parents, teachers, and I don't know, Megan or Laura, do either of you want to jump on and talk about that? Just going to put it out there. They might be listening and also chasing children. So yeah, so that's been really fruitful. We've had meetings with different people within the school system, and there is some forward motion on curriculum and curriculum review, and looking at how to engage teachers kind of across disciplines on climate. So that's good news for our community, at least. Any other questions? Okay, I have one. I definitely have been wanting to ask you this as kind of like a ending question, which is, tell us, I would just really like to hear your thoughts on the importance of envisioning the future with our kids, and the future we want to have, the future we want to create, and maybe share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's so important, Winona, because there's so much, there's so many positive things, as you said, and we can focus on that the media ends up picking up all the negatives, and there are a lot of really disturbing things that we're seeing happen with as we put our earth out of balance, right? But I think that, and I write about this as well, but we have to almost put it out there on the other side, right? Where do you imagine yourselves, and where do you imagine your children? I see my children who are now young adults, when they are my age, in a career that's satisfying, in a place where they're helping others, with someone who loves them as much as I love them, being able to enjoy being in the outdoors. That's something important to our family, but being able to feel secure in where they are, with healthcare, with access to good food, and all of those things. To ensure that happens, we have to take steps all along the way. But when I imagine them older, it's in a positive way. I can't imagine this world that would be different. And so everything that I do is working towards making that happen, whatever I can do. And so I think envisioning that future for all of us, whatever it is, whatever we love and we don't want to lose, or, putting it out there. We used to have this campaign, Climate Reality, about what do I love? And then what will I do so I don't lose it? Whether chocolate or coffee, right? Like those are important to me too. And boy, we're threatening the growing range for both of those. So what are you going to do to ensure that? And that doesn't mean, what lots of our government organizations are setting 2050 goals. That we got to have near-term targets on everything. We have to be doing things, in 3 years, 5 years, and see changes, because it's really easy to put something off to 2050 if you're an elected official, because you're not going to be in that job in 2050. And so you can say all those things, but you need to have near-term targets. And Barbara Kingsolver, she's an author and, has written some wonderful books. And she said that hope is a renewable resource, and you get to put it on again in the morning. And I think that goes with also envisioning that future. Sometimes we can't, and we just feel like, oh my gosh, that was a really tough day today. But then we got to get up in the morning and imagine it again. And then some days it's just holding the boulder, so it just doesn't roll backwards. And some days it's going to roll back a little bit, and other days we're going to push it all the way up to the top of the mountain. So it's I start the book and I end the book with this. We've got to get comfortable with this really uncomfortable fact that we're going to be living with the climate crisis for the rest of our lives. And so, and that's a heavy thing to carry, but it's, that whole story of planting seeds that we won't see grow, or planting shade trees that others will sit under, or all of those things that we envision in the future, whether they're for us or for our children and for our children's children. There are so many steps along the ways that we can walk on and work to make them happen.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Just the last call for questions, and I'm going to be mindful of our time. Tasia.
Hi.
Hi.
Wanted to thank you for your time, and also mine you for more resources. I am a nurse in a psychiatric facility. I have a chance to talk to kids for an hour at a time, and I'm formulating a 1-hour presentation on soul nostalgia. And obviously I need to be very careful about their tenuous state of being. And I love this Young Voices for the Planet. I was just wondering if you had any other short video style resources that you could point me towards for teenagers.
Yeah, there's ACE, which is the Alliance for Climate Education, and they have some really fun. It's for older on that high school, and some really great videos as well. I had mentioned Climate Generation. They do some really, they have some good workshops that are like being able to tell your climate story, and prompts that you could use with young people on how they craft their own story and then move beyond. So that's another good resource. There is a program out of Indiana. Here's the name. Jim Poyser is the fellow who is the director, and I will send the name of it. But they do climate camps and do all these kind of really fun programs. They have a pretty good website, and they also, along with this organization that now isn't working, but was called I Matter Youth, that was started by this young climate activist. So I don't know how active their website is, but this one in Indiana and does it as well. And they do help kids go and figure out ways to talk to school boards or town councils or things like that. And so it's, again, getting out of your sadness through action. And there's some really good ideas there as well. So I'm going to send a list to maybe I actually have them in the back of the book. But anyways, I'll send a list to Winona and she could share it with you of some of those. Good for you. That's awesome, Tadzia. And it's a very, yeah, I imagine that is a, you have to be real careful. Yeah. In that.
Drop the word resilient all the time.
Yes.
Be resilient.
Yeah.
Be there for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. This has just been, it's been a wonderful conversation, and we all really appreciate your time and effort to be with us. I just want to let everyone know I dropped a link in the chat for the book, and I'll send that in the follow-up information along with more event info. We'll send the recording as well. We'll have it up on our website probably early next week. So thank you everyone for coming. I hope you have a wonderful evening and it continues to be beautiful here. So I think may everyone go out and enjoy it and have a nice night.
We have to enjoy those moments when
Yeah.
we can, and be in the moment too, and not just, sometimes it's really important just to be in the moment while we do think about that future we want to create, and sometimes just being present with our children too is what's needed. So go out and enjoy. It's been my pleasure to be here. Thank you all for spending the time.
Thank you. Have a good night.